partners, and I guess that you and we all know that that place is an amazing place of production, of course, but mainly research and development. So he has been working there and collaborating with a great team of people for 20 years. Andy has been working in different projects. We have been discussing a lot about this notion and idea of multi-scalarity, how the challenges of the 21st century in terms of economy, social, but also environment is changing the way architecture needs to be thought and produced. So he will be showing and talking about projects that they range from big scale master plans to small driverless cars, I think, and that would be interesting to see. Andy is also a person that he is very close to the academia. He's a visiting professor at the Yale University, but also at the Bartlett School at the UCL in London. We were happy to have the possibility to show him around. He gave us an amazing feedback for many of the things that we're working on, and I think that also he got some feedback from us. And no more to add. Thank you very much for being here today with us, and please help me welcome Andy Bo.
Okay, does that sound all right? Everyone can hear me? It's a great pleasure to be here in Barcelona. I never need a second excuse to come to this great city. And I'm going to present the work of Foster & Partners. I've been there 20 years. I'm one of the senior partners. But I'm going to try all the time that I'm talking about we and us, because it's all about teamwork in our office. And I want to begin by just explaining, I really have two lectures in one. So I was told that you have an interest in cityscape here, and obviously you have a great interest in the detailing of things. So the first part of the talk, I talk about our global responsibilities as designers, and the second part, I talk about the human touch and the kind of work that we're doing in the office. So just to set the scene, I was born in 1961 in Edinburgh. That makes me 55. The day I was born, I was the 3 billionth baby on the planet. I was the one. I have a certificate. The 3 billionth baby on the planet. If I live to be 80, there will be 9 billion people on the planet. So in my lifetime alone, there will be 3 times as many people living on the planet. So as architects, as young architects, this has a profound impact on everything we do. And our office designs everything from the very biggest things to the very smallest things in the way that you do here. So in a moment you'll see some images. I'll just get the pointer right, here we go. You'll see some images of the highest bridge in the world, or some of the largest airports in the world. We design everything down to the door handle. And as I say, we're part of this incredible team. We come from 70 nationalities. I think you come from 41 nationalities, I hear here. And we're all part of this incredible team. I thought you might be interested in this. So our office is 1,500 strong. 160 come from Spain. So that's 10% of the office. And Spanish, we need a tapas bar now. And we have 219 Spanish speakers in our office. So we have many, many Spanish friends in our organization. And here's my theme this evening, our global responsibility to the human touch. Now, everything is becoming blurred. Every building that you design, this is an airport that we designed for Taiwan last year, and you never get a straight brief for a building anymore. An airport nowadays is a place where you go and watch basketball, or you go and watch an event in the evening. And it's also a place where they wanted to have health tourism. So people were coming from China to go to Taiwan. And our idea was that we would grow, sorry, I haven't quite got the hang of this yet. I will. the idea was we would grow herbal plants inside the airport itself. This is obviously on the land side. In an airport, you have a land side and you have an air side. So the whole thing was about creating an airport city. So my first point is, at this very big scale, everything is blurred and there's no such thing as an individual building typology anymore. The second point, to prove the same thing, in Stockholm just now, we're building a new bridge, but it's not just any kind of bridge. It's an inhabited bridge, and it's an inhabited bridge for cyclists. So the idea is you can go in on your bike, and you can go in underneath and have a coffee on the run, you can have a drink. And the cycling thing is an important thing. In a moment, I'll show you our project in London that relates to cycling. And London now has more people cycling to work than any other mode of transport. Incredibly. So for all of you who are involved in city planning here, it's a very, very big subject, how you get where you're going in mixed-use buildings. Recently, we've been involved in transforming the old port of Marseille. So we were asked about 3 or 4 years ago to look at it, and you can see around the edges how much space was given over to tarmac. You can see basically the city was dissected from its lifeblood. And what we did was we created a very large pedestrian area. We tidied everything up. We created new boat houses. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see an idea about a canopy. So we were asked to create a canopy for the fishermen in the old port. And we said to them, the city have asked us to design a canopy for you. And they said, we don't want a canopy. So we said, would you not like to be protected from the rain? No, we're fishermen. We don't mind being wet. Don't you want to be protected from the sun? We live in the south of France. We love the sun. So what we did was we created the canopy that I'll show you. So we changed from this to this. And this is another of my little themes tonight, that you guys are creating these unbelievable things. I mean, they're breathtaking. All these new facades that you're creating, new kinetic facades. But in the end, we're all designing for people. And when you've been, I'm nearly 40 years in the business now, when you're my age, you'll be so proud of the places that you create for people. So never forget who you're designing for, is another little message that I like to get across. So here we are. This is Marseille. And we wanted to create a celebration of the light of the south of France. So in this canopy we've created, there is no artificial lighting. So the sea is in the sky. You know your project is a success if buskers go there, because musicians and performers only go there if it's a popular place to be. So the whole port of the Marseille has been completely transformed. And this was why we created this mirror-like surface. There's the setting sun reflecting off the water, and it's an amazing structure at night, amazing piece of sculpture. So, we're in the business of transforming cities, we're in the business of thinking about how people move around and so on. And when I joined the office 20 years ago, this was one of the first projects that I worked on. So here you have advanced computer technology. 20 years ago even, it was in its infancy. And I'm going to show you 3 projects that emerged in the mid-90s. So this is City Hall, and it was all about the openness of government and about circulating from one floor to the other. And this is another one. It's right next door to our office. It's called Albion Riverside. And it's a residential building. And it has 2 different facades. The rear facade is like a giant sunshade, and it allows, I just want to get this button right, here we go. It curves like this to allow the maximum amount of public space. It's a giant sunshade, it's clean like this. And then there's more glazing on the north side. But here's the thing. When we did the planning drawings for this, they were all drawn by hand. That's just 20 years ago. And so it's incredible when I come to a place like this to see how our profession has completely changed. So this was these kind of building types in their infancy. So now I'm on the subject of London. I've been in London half my life now, 27, 28 years, and I've been at Foster's 20 years, as we say. London is a very dense historic city. It was really designed for the horse and carriage, not really designed to accommodate lots of different people. And you can see even in the 17th century we had traffic jams, and people were trying to figure out ways to navigate around the city. I'll just wind one back for a second. This is at a time when the population of London 300 years ago was 80,000 people. 80,000 people. And now the population of London is it's now more than 8 million. It's 8.6 million, and it's rising very quickly. So how do we deal with it? So this is London. This is dense, historic London, and it's also a very, very green city. So obviously as the population increases, we have to make sure that it remains a very green city. Just to put this in context, if London grew at the same pace over the next 300 years, the population of London would be 800 million. Sounds mad, yeah, of course it does. But that's the pace of change that we're starting to have to think about. So London, of course, is growing taller, and it can only grow taller in certain locations. Interestingly, though, again in the last 20 years, there is obviously Canary Wharf and there's the Square Mile, but there are other parts of London that are starting to grow taller. So Swiss Re is a building that came about 20 years ago. I still think it's 20 years ahead of its time, actually. As a little subplot, we love getting people on top of our buildings. Usually air conditioning gets the best view of cities, so Swiss Re has a wonderful room at the top. But it also has a magical public space at the bottom, public space that didn't exist before this building was constructed. What's interesting about it as a building for me is the way that the building is like a giant light reflector. You could see everything being cast. It's a building that breathes. It has a diagrid on the outside which creates column-free space within. A love of careful detailing. Every great tower needs a great entrance, so it has a great entrance. So it's basically a tower that has a great entrance, it has a great top, but for me the most important thing is it has wonderful public space around it. Certain parts of London can't grow tall, and the scale of London is changing very dramatically. So about 3 years ago, we started working on Battersea Power Station. So Battersea Power Station is quite near our office. Battersea Park is here and our office is somewhere over here. And we won a competition to design a new high street with Frank Gehry, and it's been a wonderful experience. And I've been working on this for the last 3.5 years, and we're on site now. So this is the new high street that we're creating together. The interesting thing about the tools that we have now to look at the way people move around cities, our observations were that people kind of swim when they're shopping. They don't go in a straight line. And so the new high street we're creating has a series of rooms within. There's double height retail units under Frank's building. We've created this grand terrace on one side. At the time of the competition, we spoke about, as is happening up here, there are people sitting up here looking down at the event that's going on down here. So this is a grand terrace like Central Station in New York. And I think what's interesting about our building is it's a real mixed-use building. So it has 33 shops and restaurants, has an underground station within the building itself, it has a hotel within it, it has 600 apartments, it has affordable housing inside the block as well, it has a doctor's clinic, it has gyms, it has restaurants, it has absolutely everything, all under London's biggest roof garden. So you know that thing I was saying before about the importance of greening the city of London, then this is our idea for this project, and it's on site now. So now we're going to fly along this little street. So you come out of the underground station, you come into a first space. Frank's done a building called the Flower that you see on the right-hand side. You go a little bit further, I call this Selfie Square. It's a place where you stop and do all the photographs of the power station. And Bjarke Ingels is designing a wonderful kind of performance space in front of the power station itself. The roof, the landscape, is being designed by Cornerfield, the guys who did the High Line in New York, working with a London-based company called LDA. And it has lots of really interesting ideas. And so at this end, there are hotel cabanas, there's a pool here now, there's a 36-seat banqueting table, there's 2 lawns, there's evening cinema, there's places where you grow food to have in the restaurants below, there's woodland glades, there's kids' play areas, there's beehives, there's a yoga deck. And the idea is that there can be public access every now and again on a ticketed basis too, which I think is a very important idea. So this is our way of giving London something back in such a high density project. I mentioned a moment ago cycling in London. And so we have a project for new cycle superhighways. If you look at a map of London, the top half of London has lots of underground lines that were built in the 1920s and 30s, but there aren't many in South London. But what London has is it has a lot of raised railway lines that plough through South London. And really the land either side of it has very little value. And we've all seen how that has changed in New York next to the High Line. So the idea with this cycle superhighway, it also contains energy, information technology, and it would transform the city like this, creating enormous value immediately next to the thoroughfare that runs through it. And I think it's a really wonderful idea. And I said it before, but I still think it's an amazing statistic now. More people are cycling to work now in London than any other mode of transport. I mean, that's pretty incredible. And I like this image because the very first thing I worked on in the office, I went there as an architect and we did the biggest transport study of London, and we did a pedestrianisation scheme in the centre of Trafalgar Square. So we got rid of traffic here, put in a big flight of stairs, and we managed to make 2 little holes in a wall. It's a listed wall. And in one side there's some public toilets, and in the inside, on the other side there's another little cafe, and it transformed the whole place. It used to be inhabited by pigeons. And so that's the thing, when you become my age, when I walk around there, I'm incredibly proud, because I think part of what you have to do as a city planner is always try and leave a city in a better way than you find it. That's it. That's what you'll get kicks out of when you get a little bit older. And so we transformed it from this to this, and this to this. So after Trafalgar Square, the next thing I worked on was the Millennium Bridge. And it's great because it's London's first pedestrian-only bridge. It used to be before this, in central London, London's first pedestrian-only bridge. Before this, you used to always cross the Thames with the noise of traffic or trains. And since we did this, visitor numbers to St Paul's have more than doubled. And of course, the Tate Modern is on the other side with really high visitor numbers. So it's the place where lovers meet. We spent forever designing the balustrades. We wanted them to be a height that you would stop and look at the view. We created the little steps on the underside. We wanted people to stop and dwell and look at the view. Again, there are buskers there now, so you can feel you made a little contribution to the city in making this project. We created little steps that kids could sit on. It's also the marriage of architecture and engineering. We were talking about that before. It's all about teamwork, these kind of projects. So this is about teamwork too. This is a project that we've just done for Nissan, and this is it's really an idea for the fuel station of the future. And so we've started to have this idea that we could look at excess power in buildings and how they can feed into cars. So these cars are obviously driverless, they're moving at night, they're looking for power. And when you look at an energy graph of buildings, residential buildings use a lot of energy in the morning and the evenings, and office buildings at lunchtime. So all the time, these vehicles are looking for excess power, and they're plugging in the curbs. When we have driverless cars, we don't have pollution. We don't have noise pollution, so vehicles can actually park within buildings. Probably in the future, you'll have a carbon credit card, and you will rent a 2-person car, 4-person car, 6-person car. And Hazel and I have been here since Saturday, so we've used carbons to come and give this lecture here tonight. So if we were going to take kids to school next week, we might not be able to start our car because we've come to Spain to give this lecture, and we'd think, oh, actually, maybe we shouldn't have given the lecture. Maybe we should have done it in a video conference. So it's only that moment where transportation really matters, I think, that our world will begin to become a different kind of place. So I've been talking about London for the last 5-10 minutes because I've been based there half my life. London is this size, and you can see carbon emissions here, 1 ton. But there are other cities. A few weeks ago I was in Houston, and carbon emissions per person, there are 25 tons there. It's a real carbon society. And so you can see cities like Houston grow at about 10 miles every 10 years. They're pushing out Phoenix, Dallas, Houston. They're getting bigger and bigger all the time. So what's the future for these kind of cities? Well, I think the answer has to be something like this. This is a scheme we're doing in Jeddah. And this guy is coming out of the house, and he's about to commute to work. And he's asked if he's going to be late again, so his blood pressure is rising, his heartbeat's going up. For me, it's a very familiar story, being in London, I have to say. And so, we're working on a brand new transport network, and how all of this can come together in certain locations, it's obvious. Like Battersea, you have to design and build in a more unified way around major transport connections. So there's something that we're working on just now. And this was my little green light bulb for Houston a couple of weeks ago. So now what I want to do, I want to talk about space, and then I'm going to talk about the human touch. I'm going to talk about a few projects that we've been looking at recently. So our first foray into space was with Richard Branson, and we did this lovely project called Spaceport in the desert in New Mexico. And again, it's a mixed-use building because it's a place where they garage the aircraft that are going to take you up into space. But it's also a place where you will go and spend a little time before you go for a flight. So it's a mixed-use building. So here's the garage. And from that, we were invited by the European Space Agency to look at what would happen if we built on the moon. And so this is where Angelos and our research and development people really kicked in, Xavier and everybody. This is the whole idea of sending rockets to the moon, creating inflatable structures, and then using 3D printers to print with moon dust to make solid shells. And so here's the idea. And from that, we were then asked to look at Mars. And what's interesting about Mars is that when you land on Mars, you have to have a soft landing. So these things land in these giant inflatables, they move together, they gather to create these new space stations. But when we started to talk about it in the office, we realized that it takes you 3 days to go to the moon, but it takes you 7 months to go to Mars. So if you're on a 6-month mission to Mars, then you would be with the same people for 2 years. 7 months there, 6 months on the planet, 7 months back. So if you just look around you and the other people in the row, and do you like them enough that you'd want to spend 2 years together? I hope so. I hope so. But then you start to think about the psychology of space and what it really means. And so we started to imagine interiors, what kind of materials a space station on Mars should really feel like. And in the end, people like their little drawings done by their kids. They like pets. In this case, they're robotic pets. But that made us think even harder about our holistic awareness. Our holistic awareness and all of the 5 senses and what it means in architecture. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to talk about a few projects to share how we're thinking about these subjects now. So I've explained how we think about cities, and I haven't shown you a lot tonight, but we have amazing tools now to help people navigate around cities. So now I'm trying to bring the conversation down in scale a bit. And we have all these incredibly talented people. This is an architect's office in the 21st century. And you can also see that we have people here who are going out and studying their brainwaves and seeing what really, really excites them as they move around the city. So here's a guy who is going from our office across to the King's Road. Obviously seen something interesting in the King's Road, so we're thinking... Huh? Okay, great, great. So you can see we have an interest in sound. We have our own recording studios in the office. I've done voiceovers in that little room before now. We're interested, I'll mention how important your visual fields are, the movement of daylight, of course. The things you touch, your sensitivities to touch are an important subject. And of course, taste. So here one of our robots serving a glass of wine. We're architects and we live in the visual world, and the reason why that is so important is that your vision is your most important sense. So you'll see. So therefore, you think about the architecture of shade, you think about the architecture of color, and you think about the architecture of reflection on materials. And you also think about things like this. In our office, we have product design guys led by Mike Holland, and the videos that I'm showing you are done in-house, the music is done in-house. And these 2 videos are the next generation of lamps that we've been designing. And so you can see an idea here about what it would be like if you just use one LED as a powerful source for a lamp, and how you switch a lamp like this on and off. So you're going to see this ring at the bottom turns, and that's how you increase the illuminance. The LED goes through a cone that magnifies it, and then it hits a translucent white reflector, and then the light comes bouncing back down. And they're all in production now, and they're really exquisite. I mean, they're low-powered lamps. It magnifies a single source, so they're low energy. And it came from an idea of a candle inside a cylinder. You know, your inspiration always has to come from somewhere. And then moving that on a little bit further. This is a lamp we've been designing. Also, in this case, it's about a ring of LEDs, and it's about reflectors. So these are suspended above you. They come in a whole range of different materials. So the lamps come in different diameters. And just in terms, like, I think part of my job is trying to bring the different parts of our office together. And I noticed that some of our guys looking at the psychology of space were working on thoughts on how you can change luminance so that, you know, we're in a dark space just now, but if there was a bright window here and a dark wall over there, we could look at the luminance of space and we could tune it. And so you could create a better environment on a winter's day over there. So we're looking at those kind of things now. I use this project, I think, is one of the best things we've ever created. This is at the time, the highest bridge in the world. This is the Meo Viaduct. And I could talk about it for a long, long time. I could talk about, in engineering terms, why the columns are like this, because they reduce the moment at the head of the column, how this thing was physically constructed. It's on a curve, so as you drive across, you really experience the cables. It's a white bridge because the hills are dark, so it's seen in silhouette on the other side. But again, I want to just stick with the theme of seeing. So I mentioned before the design of the balustrade of the Millennium Bridge. And it was important that anyone in a wheelchair could see the view as well, and little kids, so it was made of wires. But when you're designing a car bridge, you have a different challenge because your eye level is down low when you're in a car and you want to see the view. So the challenge in designing a balustrade for a bridge is to make sure that you don't create a very big barrier to the wind that will increase wind loads upon the bridge itself, but also to allow people to see. And so you're going to see the detail here. So there are a series of half cylinders that are then fastened in this very, very simple way. And that tiny little detail there says everything about our office. It's from the biggest idea to the smallest detail. And that detail, people spent a long, long time in the office to create something that if somebody had to change that plank on a very wet day, the plank wouldn't fall down into the valley, so they'd be safe. Their job would be easy. So that design was for two people working on a bridge in the pouring rain and making their life safe and easy. And that's what design's all about, actually, in my mind. Big ideas down to the smallest things. So I've spoken about vision. And vision is 10 times more powerful than your other senses. So now I'll talk about touch. This is a museum in Narbonne that is on site now. It's a museum of Roman antiquities. And Narbonne was a very important Roman port in the south of France. And we have to contain a lot of these beautiful tombs, these artifacts within. That's the primary reason why this museum is being built. But when we started to talk about the project, we became interested in the idea that you might touch the building and in some way touch the materials that the Romans used to use. It's a little bit like going into the ground and finding materials and then pulling them up out of the ground, the clays, the stones, the aggregates that they used. And that's the basic idea of this project. And here are the mock-ups. So it's a kind of rammed concrete, and it's all underway now. The next project I want to talk to you about is a recent one. It's a university in China, and it's very calm, it's very simple and very understated, but I think it's a really lovely place because it's a celebration of the brick and the scale of the brick, the texture that it has. And I think what's interesting about our office is that we're quite comfortable doing very powerful three-dimensional things, but at other moments it's the right thing to do, something quiet, very calm. And I love these two images from last week when there was an opening where everyone who worked on the project was presented with a brick. I mean, that says everything about this project in my mind. I really love that. And this is the Royal Yacht Club in Monaco. And again, I'm on the theme of touch, what it's like to actually touch a building. And the balustrade is a very interesting design because it's really 4 or 5 different balustrades in one. So the lower portion here is a sunshade. The middle part is connected to a concrete floor. Then there's a vision panel. Then there's 2 open panels that allow anyone in a wheelchair to see. And then it has a timber handrail. You know, you want to feel like you're on the deck of a cruise liner. So I think, you know, that moment where you touch the building and you make a connection. Same with a door handle. It's the same kind of thing. So this is what we do. This is what we worry about. And now I'll just talk about the evolution of tables for a moment. This is the famous Nomos table that was really the first foray into product design in my mind. But more recently, you know, here's a coffee table that's from pressed metal, one piece of pressed metal. Over here is a casting in ferro cement. But this is interesting. This is a new table. And nowadays, everything has to plug in. You know, when you're designing a seat, whether you're designing a table, everything, you have to plug everything in. That won't last much longer because pretty soon we'll all be wearing garments where you can just put your phones inside and they'll be charged inside your clothes. But for the time being, you have to design tables where you can plug things in. And we were talking earlier about how recently, in the last year, I've had to convert my mum's flat, the place she's lived in for the last 60 years, for full disabled access. And I worried about her height. She's visually impaired, so I studied the house like that. I thought about the height that everything should be. So the point is, we have a real aging population now. In America, by 2050, there will be 1 million people over 100 years of age. So as designers, it's a subject we have to think about very carefully. And I think this kind of design, which is all about the changing height of furniture, is a very, very important subject. So this is a table that changes. It has power inside. And quite often now in fit-outs in office buildings, people like to have things where you stand. It's a much more interactive way, healthier way to be. So there's a lot more things like this. And I'll show you a little video in a second, but what I can't share across a video screen, but I can share if you come to our London office. When you touch this table, the way this has been designed, this is designed with black aluminium. It absorbs radiation, so it has inherent warmth, and it has an etched surface in glass. And when you touch the glass surface on this, it feels warm. And you just see people doing that. And that's really the next generation of thinking, I think, where you're all going to be heading next, you know, the material quality of things and how it can positively influence our lives together. And I like this little video of how this came together and these two guys putting it together. So that's touch. So now I'm going to just mention the subject of hearing. And I talk about two projects in Barcelona, one successful, one not so successful in the end, sadly. This is an image of Barcelona skyline as it might have been. And these, coming up to the Olympics in 1992, a lot of the television companies wanted to have masts on the skyline of your city. And working with the mayor, Norman convinced everybody to try and the mayor, Pascal Maragall, convinced all of the different authorities to work together and create this tower. And I still think it's a really powerful symbol, a very beautiful symbol for your city. And the way it was built was quite extraordinary. It was built on the ground and then it was lifted into place. And it's a really elegant thing. So in my mind anyway, I hope you'd agree, I think it was a successful intervention in Barcelona. And one that got away was this one. So I was with Norman in Moscow, I don't know, it must be about 10 years ago or something, and we got a phone call from Barcelona Football Club to say we'd won the competition to do the stadium. And sadly it didn't come into being, but our idea, here's my little subject of hearing. I was at the match on Saturday, and that's actually why I don't have a lot of voice left, because I was willing Barca to score for the last 15 minutes, and it was incredible. I'm a big football fan, so you can imagine what this project would have meant to us in the office. But anyway, but we noticed that as you walk around the ground, there are all these plaques, and Barcelona has clubs all around the world, and so with the artworks of Miro in your city, with the incredible stained glass in the Sagrada Familia, our idea was to embrace the Nou Camp with colour. And of course there's two types of colour. They're the colour of the team themselves and the Catalan flag coming over the top. And that was the whole idea. And the whole idea that the people who have ownership and an interest in the club would come and embrace the club again and maybe pay for one of these kite-like petals on the outside. And on one side, the petals were higher, because it was also a sunshade, lower on the other. But the whole idea was because the games are mainly played at night. So this is nighttime architecture. Anyway, I make a golden rule never to show a competition that's gone away. I never do it, but in this case I've just done it. But not to worry, onwards and upwards, right? So that was hearing. And so now I want to talk about smell. It's a strange subject to talk about, an architect to talk about smell in the buildings that are designed. This little project I think is a very important project in our office. This is a Maggie Centre. It's been built in Manchester. And it's a building where you go if you have been diagnosed with cancer. A place where you go where you're at your most vulnerable moment and with your family. So this is a building that has human scale, it has detail, there is a lot of timber, it's a warm building. You know, in my mind, somehow it feels like you're inside a musical instrument, somehow the building embraces you. But then, so there are many subjects you could talk about in this little building. The fact that it's really designed like a home, so it has a front door, an arrival space, a communal space, an eating space, more private spaces, but a lovely relationship with the landscape that surrounds it, and greenhouse and so on. But then I think the subject of smell, I think, is just the growing of plants in a greenhouse, or the smell of a crackling fire, in the winter, or doors that open and smells coming from the outside to the inside. And inevitably, in the end, a building like this is something that has to engage with your senses. You know, when you're at your most vulnerable moments in your life, say you're at a funeral in a church and there's 10-15 minutes before the family arrive, and you look up at the detail in a church and the sunlight comes through a stained glass window, somehow the architecture talks to you. Somehow the materials are talking to you. I look around me now and I see these unbelievable things. I'm trying to get across the idea that these things can do so much more than be made of clay or concrete or whatever the next material you all invent. Materials can actually have a profound effect on you in a really positive way. And I think this little building is so important because it does all of these things. Taste. Again, you can see vision is infinitely more powerful, but this little office building that we've done in Copenhagen has just opened, and this is a nice place to have a cup of coffee. There are indoor plants, there are benches from recycled materials, recycled floors. It's 1,000,000 miles away from an office floor that has grey concrete and a couple of chairs. And it's a nice place to have a cup of tea, cup of coffee. And this is how our office has changed. So this used to be our print room. And this is really, it kind of, if you look carefully, kind of looks like you're at home. So there's lots of different bits of furniture. There are some trees, there's beautiful daylight. And it's actually all about a nice place to work together, to have a cup of tea. And it's packed. It's absolutely packed, which again is the kind of social aspects of the spaces that we create together and the new ways that we work together. I'm never at my desk now. I could have a visitor's book and I could sign the visitor's book every time I'm at my desk. I'm always somewhere else. So, I'm now going to try and bring all this together. I've been talking about the architecture of the senses and what it means to be an architect in the 21st century, and what it means to you, the next generation of architects. And I started off at the beginning talking about the rise of world population. So I suspect that you might have to design many more big buildings. Battersea is a big building. I've been working on it 3.5 years and it's still got many years to go. In the future, you may have to design projects like this. This was our Millennium Tower, and it was designed for Tokyo because Japan, along that edge where there was another earthquake yesterday, it was quite scary, It's full. I mean, Tokyo and all the other cities all are co-joined. So this was an attempt about 20 years ago to really start to look at a mixed-use building. And this is a vertical city. And sometimes one of Norman's sketches is worth more than 1,000 words. Because in this, you can see diagrid structures, you can see gardens in the sky, you can see whole ideas about mixed use. So cities are going to grow taller, and you'll probably be involved in designing many more tall buildings, whether you're in Paris, whether you're in India. Their vertical cities are here, and they're here to stay. In your lifetime, in 2066, I'll be dead because I won't be able to live to 105. But in your lifetime, a third of the world will be solar powered. So you might work on projects like this. This is a project from Red to Dead, the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, where we explored using wind turbines to pump salt water from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea. They come back down desalination plants to green the desert to create new areas to live. I think when you're designing these new structures, you have to think very, very carefully what part of the world you're designing for. It's a massive, massive subject. You know, we're used to building in London, but we have 20 offices around the world. So sometimes you have to design in places where the sun is really your enemy. And in other places, there are, in the northern climates and the far southern climates, the sun is your friend. You want your buildings to open up and really welcome the sun. And it's an important difference. So this is a building that was done in Milan, and it's now being transported to Abu Dhabi. So it was for the Expo in Milan, but the whole idea was the creation of spaces that during the time of the expo would be pleasant places for people to be. My colleagues went and studied sand dunes in Abu Dhabi and created this wonderful three-dimensional creation. Sometimes you're having to deal with heat and humidity. So I'm basically thinking about places like Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, and so on. Of course, there are other places, and there is a difference. So this is Beach Road in Singapore, and here we've designed these canopies, and the canopies are obviously there to provide shade, but they're solid canopies that can breathe, and in that way they begin to deal with humidity as well. And that's in Singapore. There's a place called Clark's Quay, which is very popular in Singapore. It has a membrane roof. And what we always do afterwards, we always go back and test our projects to see if our philosophy came true. And you can see the top one is Clark's Quay and the lower one is our Beach Road scheme. It has nearly 75% less solar radiation just through design. So you can go so far with passive design if you really stop and think about the climate that you're trying to design for. And sometimes you have to design for extreme cold. And as I said, you know, the offices of the future in these kind of places, you know, the glass technology has changed so much. It's super highly insulated now. But generally speaking, you have structures that deal with heavy snow loads, and it really wants to welcome in the sun. And this is another project about the cold that we've done for the Red Cross. We became interested in highly insulated fabrics. And so we've created this new tent. And our guys went to Outer Mongolia, and it's one thing to build a model in the office. It's another thing to build mock-ups. But then it's another thing to go to the location and actually try and live within the tent. And because we were told that a lot of people die after large earthquakes and so on from the cold. They don't have shelter fast enough. They might get tents there, but they die of the cold. So, you know, these are other interests that we have as an office. My point is, when you're designing anything tomorrow, whatever you're doing, always bear in mind that you're designing for humanity. You're designing for people. Wherever or whatever you are doing, you have to think about the people that you're designing for. And the last project I'm going to show is this one. So here you can see our partner Narinder, and he went to Sierra Leone, and they were trying to deliver vaccines. And in London, we sometimes complain about potholes in the road. But, I mean, just look at that. So they have to transport vaccines. They might come from Central Europe. They have to get to far outreached areas. So our idea with the Norman Foster Foundation is to create a new centre for drones, so that the drones can be used to transport vaccines across large distances. And the first things I spoke about at the beginning were mixed-use buildings. If you remember, right back at the very beginning, how it's now important that buildings have more than one use. And so you can see at some moments these buildings that we're creating are there to be little airports for drones, and in other moments they're social centres and the vaccines are being delivered and so on. Everything tied, I'm trying to describe how in my mind everything's all tied together. The social aspects of architecture, the way we detail things, the materials that we use, they're all important subjects. And again, this is about using local materials in an interesting way. There were mock-ups, I think it was a quarter-scale mock-up that was created of one of these new structures, and now it's been built at the Venice Biennale as a full-scale mock-up. I think it's absolutely beautiful, apart from anything else. So the idea is that we'd build more of these. And that's where I finish. So I don't know how long I've spoken. I know I've got 148 slides, I know that. I had something like 256 last night, but I have 148. And I don't know how long I've spoken. Oh, I've got 3 minutes left. Shall I sing a song? Okay. I'm very, very proud to be here. I think that I was maybe mentioned at the beginning, I'm very fortunate. I spend time at the Bartlett, I spend time at Yale, and there are some wonderful schools of architecture around the world. And what you're doing here is as good as all these other great schools. It's just fantastic, and I was very honoured to be asked to be here, and I wish you all every success. I was pleased to hear that you come from 40 different countries, 41 different countries, because, you know, we're all one family and we're all trying to design together now, and we're very mobile, and it's good to share ideas from different countries and different cultures. I find that very important. I also think it's very important that you have different backgrounds. So you come from engineering as well as architecture. My dad was in the Royal Engineers in the Army, and my dad was a town planner. So all of these things are kind of in my bloodstream too. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for the great lecture. I've worked with you in a few of these projects, but it's the first time I see them through such a cohesive and personal perspective, so thank you for that. Questions? Yes.
Hello. To be honest, I was under the impression, false impression, that I think most people who don't really know what Foster & Partners are all about, that Foster & Partners are about or projects that are guided by money, big names, and all that. But I have to say that this has been the most human presentation I've ever seen so far in those past 3 months. And I really thank you for that. It's great inspiration. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask you, what is the architectural mentality that drives design away from the human? Because we've seen a number of projects that really explain what the architectural mentality would require to actually design for humans. But in your experience,
so the question is, what drives design away from the human experience? So in that, do you mean the kind of three-dimensional work that is happening here and the exploration that you're doing, or do you have something else in mind? What do you have in mind?
I mean, we've looked at how architecture is connected to the senses.
The senses, yeah.
Yes, and how that is very important to actually have a human-centered architectural mentality.
Yeah.
So what would be...
What should designers not do?
Yes.
Okay, I think I'll try, and I'm not sure I fully understand, but I will try. I think that nowadays the things that are going on in here of 3D printing, materials that grow, and all the wonderful experiments that we see going on here, they're all scalable. So there's a particular way that you can, we have limits on the size of things that can be 3D printed. There are things that work in combination that can create the size of a table or a bridge and beyond. And I think the thing you mustn't do is forget not just human skill, but how you actually build something. So my point is that the construction industry has for a long time been based on brick, concrete, steel and timber. They're the basic materials, and the building industry has been very slow to react until your generation has come along. And so my point is that what you mustn't do wrong is think that these incredible things that you can generate can instantly become things that would cover one of the biggest airports in the world, and that you have to think about cost and value engineering. You have to think about all of these things. So I'm trying to answer in the way, think about humans in a different way. Think about the physical scale of the things that you're creating and how they might be formed, how ideas are scalable and deliverable and can build mass housing and all the things we need and everything else. So whatever it is you're doing, if the real question is what shouldn't we be doing wrong, I mean, you're doing so much right, because the only limit is your imagination, and you have it in an unbelievable way. So I hope I've begun to answer your question. I hope so.
You have. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Mariam is next.
Hello, thank you for your lecture. In reference to your first project about the hotel and the urban scale city, I'm also dealing the same situation of urban agglomeration and how to deal with this situation, whether it's urgent or it's gradual. But the way you were approaching the growth within, if we keep growing vertically within 26 kilometers square, and we contain 800 million people within the next 24th century. Are we gonna, is this the solution, to have like kind of double layered city and grow vertically instead of finding a new solution of kind of occupying in new land in a horizontal way?
It's a fantastic question, because the question is how on earth we deal with massive urban growth in our cities, and it's not a 2-minute answer. I mean, it's obvious, and it's also obvious that there are many examples that you can cite as being good examples. So, the European city that we all love can be the ones that have grown over a long period of time, and they're organic. And Barcelona, you know, the diagonally I can see in the walls and the planned city has its magic because it has the historic quarter, which is more like I described, you know, a historic city down here, in contrast to a grid city which has public, private, and semi-private space in urban blocks. That's the basic DNA of many European cities. Glasgow, where I studied, Venice, Vienna, Berlin, you know, that's the basic DNA. But then what happens, you know, you now start to see in Barcelona, you start to see the city rising up onto the hillside. And then you get the favela effect that you have in Rio, which is another massive topic. But, you know, the greenery, that edge that runs all the way along that edge of Barcelona. So here's a question, you know, is the next bit at one end of the diagonally or another to grow densely and build taller and be, you know, sometimes in Frankfurt or definitely in London with Canary Wharf. London has a historic heart around the city. It had to build a new dense area down there. La Défense in Paris. You know, those cities made a conscious decision in a planned way to build out to the edge. Can there be more waterborne Barcelona? Can there be other things out in the ocean, like the big tower that I showed you in Japan? No, there's no one answer to any city. It's a very, very complex conversation. But again, I think it's to do with transportation, it's to do with mix of use, it's trying to get people working on public transport, people using public transport more readily. It's not necessarily about building tall. You know, I said that's a possibility, but it probably is a conversation about building more densely. And certain cities have rules about just how high you can build. So there's a difference between density and height, I would argue. But it's a very, very, very different subject. Because again, to return to the theme of humanity, you often feel comfortable next to a 4-story building. 6-story building needs width, like a Parisian boulevard. Then the wider streets in Barca can survive at 8 stories because there's greater width. But what happens when there's not enough space to create blocks of those density, and so on and so on and so on? I'd love there to be a magic answer, but there is no magic answer. Hong Kong is successful because it's bounded by the high mountains behind and the harbour in front, and it had to build in a linear way. So its urban transport network is very successful because it's linear. It's not like the big spread cities of America that I mentioned. Manhattan is very successful because it had the perimeter of the water's edge on either side that keep it dense like that. And of course, you could then talk about Manhattan for ages because it's obviously tall in Midtown and downtown, but now some blocks are going super tall. You've probably seen some of them. So skyline of New York is changing rapidly again. Not one answer. I mean, I said before, I'm 55. I started when I was 17, and I've been in London for nearly 30 years. I could not have imagined the changes in London in the last 30 years in my lifetime. I couldn't have imagined it. London is getting much taller in different places. It's getting much denser, but it's still a wonderful place to live, I would argue.
In the beginning of the presentation, you've presented some early projects which have been done before really the technology and with hand drawings. And we saw that these are really successful projects, especially in a way they were addressed to the human and the contact with the human being. And they're well designed at the senses. So now with all the technology that we have, how do you think and in which ways technology really help us to design better for the humanity?
I think it's a great question, and we were talking about it earlier. Technology. I'm just about getting my mind around how to use an Apple Pencil, on a MacBook Pro. That's about as far as I've got, yeah. And I spend my life with one of these, two of these. I kind of eat these every day. I eat pencils, and I was explaining earlier that if you sit with a client and a project's not going so well, for my generation of architects, you sit in front of them and you draw together and you talk, and I can't tell you how many projects over the years, those conversations over a dinner, that instantaneous connection. I think for your generation, you have the ability to sit together and you can draw on screen and you can model and you can move around. It's another part of this interactive process. But design's design. Whether it's this or whether it's this, design is design. But I just think that when I teach, at Yale, I teach with a guy called Patrick Bellew, and he's an environmental engineer. And the way Yale is set up, there would be a Frank Gehry studio and Zaha, sadly no longer here, Zaha's studio, or Peter Eisenman, but Bob Stern would have a classical studio or a postmodern studio, and like this, where everybody's rowing in the same direction. And Bob's idea about architectural education was to expose his students to every kind of facet of contemporary discourse in architecture. And for me, when I teach, I say 10 students, 10 voices. I want to try and help the students find their own voice, and not design like Foster and Partners, because we never do the same things twice. We're always trying to invent. And so I try and help people find their voice. And I don't mind if somebody is going to explore the thing through laser printing or really making models, which is what I love about here. The very best students at the Bartlett, I've been an external examiner there for 10 years, they're the ones who appear with the early thoughts. They've got their hands dirty, they've made models, they're trying to physically make the materials, and it's a whole journey. It's a year-long journey. But they've actually, and when I studied at the Glasgow School of Art, and I would paint and I would use spray paint, and as soon as I did that, my professor Andy McMillan told me never to do it again. As soon as I did something, I won't swear because it's been recorded, but he would tell me never to do that again, and I thought, I've done really badly. But he was pushing me and pushing me and pushing me. Okay, you've proved you can do that. Next. You proved you can do that. Next. So to be a really creative person, I think that you have to continually challenge yourself and push the boundaries and learn new skills. And in my head, it's not just about computer programming, because when you actually physically make something, you learn. And that's that scalable point. You learn the moment where a thing that is a clay worm is no longer going to be robust enough to reach that ceiling or make a span this wide. The makingness of things is at the roots of what you do here. I trained as an architectural technician first. I learned how to build before I studied architecture, so it's also in my bloodstream. That's why I like it here. I believe in what you're doing. So do everything. Don't sit staring at a screen 24 hours a day. Get your hands dirty.
Nice. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, Andy. I'm a first-year student here in the IAC of a master, and in one of our courses is Introductory Studio. The topic is solar machines. The aim of the course is to create a solar artifact that is able to react with all these phenomena. The question is, based on your experience in all the projects you have exposed about solar machines, what tips can you give to all our course?
It's a good question, and I don't really know the answer. Angelos, can you help?
Basically, he just needs the 3D models of the last project you showed. No, I'm joking.
The truth is there are people far more qualified than I to talk about that subject, and I'll happily put you in contact with them in the office, yeah? I'm not trying to duck a question. I don't know the answer to that. Sure, I'd be more than happy to, yeah. And then I'd try and contribute. I just, I don't know the answer to that. But I love the fact that you're doing it here. I mean, if you're looking at machines and nanotechnologies and all of that, at the Bartlett 10 years ago, we encouraged the paperless studio where everything was done in video. We encouraged certain students to just create a piece of a facade, and it would be a lens. One guy wanted, at the time before mobile phones, he wanted to create the perfect phone booth that you could speak inside a phone booth and you wouldn't have to have a door that would open that was difficult. And certain people in this room will go on to be great robotic people, and there'll be great acousticians in here. Some people will become developers. Some people will do lots of other things. Because my point is, you're proving it that architecture isn't the mainstream profession it once was. It's much more varied now in a really, truly wonderful way. And that, our office, I think, proves it, and it's proved in here tonight, because you're from all these different disciplines, but you're all contributing to the subject of architecture, that's what I think is really important. So if your interest is in photovoltaic mobility, I'm on your team. It's absolutely the way forward. I'm just not that clever.
I think we have one last question from...
I have 2 questions. I don't know. Maybe the first question is, what is the biggest challenge for such a massive, let's say, office like Foster's, where, as you are saying, like there is a huge multidisciplinary team working together for different scale of projects and different nature of projects and the complexity of it? That would be one question, and maybe the relevant to that is whether you see that in the future of the profession, those kind of big scale, let's say, offices would still be necessary, or whereas a kind of a more distributed a model of smaller offices or startups and mixing of groups of people would make much more sense for the challenges that we have to face.
Okay, so the first question is how a very large office can still rise to the challenge of what we're trying to do, such big projects and so on. So my answer is about invention. So about 7 or 8 years ago, we restructured the office. We divided into 6 architecture studios. So I'm involved in one. Each of them are roughly 150 people, roughly. And we could have divided into Foster Residential, Foster Office, that kind of thing. But then there was a belief that each of the different studios should not specialize. So as a result, if you come in with a project for a bridge or a theatre or a stadium, then each of the individual studios would work on that project so that you don't know too much about a particular subject. So you're constantly trying to reinvent. Beyond that, what we do on occasions, we will do joint ventures between 2 studios, if it makes sense. If somebody has recently built an opera house, say. But generally speaking, the way the office is structured, it's geared up to constant challenge and invention. So I hope that, and we've invested heavily in research and development. We have engineers, we have structural, mechanical, we have landscape. We have everything all under one roof now. So that's how our office has changed in the last 10 years. The second one, you have to remind me. The second one.
You see that the future of architecture would need...
an actual practice. Well, I think the profession will change, because somebody told me recently, and I don't want to quote it because it's a live stream, but the only reason for not quoting it is I don't know the exact number, but the number of people who are working as freelance now, this next generation of architects and designers is phenomenal. And there's a massive proportion of people working in Manhattan now that are freelance. So I was told that Sweden is moving towards a 6-hour working day. And the belief is that you will never switch off from this, and you'll be more productive in your 6 hours, and you'll go home and you'll be spending time with your kids and you'll be doing different things. So the way we're all going to work, without question, is going to change. Is there a place for the big, gigantic practice? I hope so, because I'm part of one. But I think also, I genuinely believe what I've just said, that, like our son is 28, he just had 6 months in New York, he's back in London, he's found a cheap way to fly to New York through Iceland, so he went there from 3 days. He's creative in an ad agency, so he's completely mobile. His office is his laptop, and so we'd all agree that things are changing very, very quickly. Airbnb has meant that hotel operators are having to reinvent themselves, and Uber, all the taxi drivers now are having to reinvent themselves. And so architectural offices, we're trying to constantly reinvent ourselves in response to those kind of questions. But it will change. It's changing now, and that's what's exciting about it. Yeah.
Okay, I think on that note we can wrap up. I'd like to thank you personally again for being here and giving us the honor, and I invite you to thank Andy once more, and then you can have a beer and reflect.